M. Night Shyamalan is back. This time, he brings you a psychological horror movie, Knock at the Cabin. The film is about a family that is on vacation in a secluded cabin in the woods. A mysterious cult breaks in and takes them hostage. Once inside, they explain to the family their mission. The apocalypse is about to start, and the only way to stop it is for the family to kill one of its members voluntarily as a sacrifice. The story takes place mostly inside the cabin, except for a few flashback scenes of the family designed to flesh out their backstory. This makes it easier to care about the characters. It also adds variety to the claustrophobic narrative. This film opens with the old version of the Universal logo. That's a clue that it will go for a retro approach when it comes to presentation. The cinematography was good. It's really challenging to keep the story fresh on a visual level when you're stuck in a single location, but the film succeeds. It's not over the top with the shots, but it's effective enough to avoid being boring. It looks as good as it can given the constraints. My favorite thing about Knock at the Cabin is definitely Dave Bautista's performance. He has said before that he wants to expand his horizons as an actor. For example, in an interview with GQ, he was talking about his career and about Guardians of the Galaxy, and said this: "I'm so grateful for Drax, I love him, but there's a relief that it's over. It wasn't all pleasant, it was hard playing that role. The makeup process was beating me down, and I just don't know if I want Drax to be my legacy. It's a silly performance, and I want to do more dramatic stuff." There's also this clip from an interview with The Hollywood Reporter.
And I remember her speaking with such high regard about an actor named Lee Pace. She said, "Lee's amazing, Lee can do anything." And I can remember the way she said that with such confidence. And I want people to say that about me. I want people to speak to me in those regards. You know, Dave can do anything. And that's what I want to be my legacy.
All the things he said are evident in this movie. He's going all in with the character of Leonard. You can see his commitment to the role. The way he plays him is perfect. You feel the horrible struggle he's going through. He's playing a character that is convinced he has to do the terrible things he's doing. From his perspective, there's no choice. The fate of humanity is at stake. The turmoil generated by his actions added a welcome layer of intensity to the story. There's also the physical aspect of his character. He's huge and covered with tattoos, but he has a gentle personality. This adds depth to his scenes. The contrast works for the story. On the other side of this coin is Ben Aldridge, another highlight of the film. He plays Andrew, one of the dads. His performance was on point. He makes the movie feel more grounded, which is essential when you're presented with a crazy situation. His character is in constant survival mode, pushing back against everything the strangers tell him. He tries to escape and fight back at every turn. Andrew serves as the skeptic bulldozer, shooting down all the cult's attempts at convincing them of their mission. The dynamic between Leonard and Andrew is a great part of the film. The movie constantly makes you ask questions about the cult's actions. Do you believe them? After they show some proof to the family, you wonder again, what if it's a trick? This guessing game gets the ball rolling. It gives the story momentum. In the first 15 to 20 minutes, the movie lays out the rules of the concept. The strangers want to prevent the apocalypse. They have to convince the family to kill one of its members to save the world. They can't force them. They can't kill them. There are two big problems with the approach the movie took to execute the premise. The first one is lack of tension. The story presents a home invasion scenario. The main characters are taken hostage. At first glance, it sounds like the perfect opportunity to build suspense, but here the lack of tension is embedded in the premise. Since the strangers can't kill the family, and the family knows this, the characters are not really in danger. This inevitably sucks the tension out of the story. The rules of the premise affect the movie's capacity to be thrilling. This means the narrative must find another way to raise the stakes. It has to create suspense elsewhere. The question is, how does it accomplish that? Well, the film makes a wager. It tries to compensate by making the external stakes higher. The entire world hangs in the balance. That may or may not be true, you won't know until the ending, but the film tries to bring the tension back by focusing all its energy on whether the family will believe the cult or not. The wager is that perhaps these new stakes are enough to compensate for the lack of suspense and danger inside the cabin. The new tension hinges on the debate between the doomsday cult and the family, but it isn't compelling enough to sustain the story. This brings me to the second problem. Why wasn't the debate compelling enough? Because there's too much exposition, or rather, The exposition sequences are bad, they were poorly handled. During the first act, you're asking so many questions. The premise is intriguing, the cultists too, because they don't behave like typical criminals. There's something else going on here. The way the film handles the audience's curiosity is simple. The characters just tell you everything. Done, that's it. After the strangers explain their mission, the rest of the movie is just them trying to convince Eric and Andrew that they must make the sacrifice to save the world. The issue is that these initial scenes are exposition dumps. They feel like school presentations. That's how in your face it gets. It's interesting when the cultists talk about their apocalyptic visions, but once you get the gist, the dialogue stops being engaging. It would have been great if the movie had shown the visions from the cultists' perspective. That would have added another layer of horror. If the movie shows you the terrible visions you could see from inside, the immense pressure they're under, the reason they feel they have no choice. There are no visuals or flashbacks or anything like that to support those moments, it's just them talking. The way they approached it was boring. Act 2 and 3 boil down to a waiting game, with a few scenes of physical resistance until the family decides to make the sacrifice or not. This means that the stakes are external until the moment they decide. The world outside the narrative is the one that's in danger. Allegedly, of course, not the characters of the story right here, the ones you're watching. This drains dramatic energy from the movie. On the plus side, the runtime is perfect. The movie doesn't drag, it doesn't feel bloated, which is a significant risk when you're dealing with just one location for most of the story. In general, the intensity that Bautista and Aldridge bring to the story is what holds it together. These two are the main reason you can go along with the waiting game. It's easy to put yourself in their shoes, thinking, what would I do if I were them? There's also a good thrilling moment in the film where Andrew escapes from the cabin and tries to get his gun. This sequence was well done, I liked it. Another thing I liked was the way the film handled the natural disasters. I know it can get tiresome when movies show you news clips as exposition, especially in apocalyptic movies. It's an overused narrative device, but here I think they pulled it off. After every death, you're starving for outside confirmation. It was a good way to deliver it. It works because it wasn't just background information. The characters actually discuss what they're seeing. The story makes it part of the debate, it fits into the central conflict. In conclusion, is this movie good or what? Do I recommend it? Well, this is a mixed bag. The concept is interesting. The film has two compelling performances that make you care about what's happening, and the rest of the cast is fine. The story keeps you guessing during the first two acts. The fact that the intruders have to convince the family is an appealing aspect of the narrative. That's the good stuff, but the way the movie handled the exposition sequences was poor. The rules set by the concept sucked the tension out of the narrative. They transformed the movie from a survival horror thriller set during a home invasion into a philosophical debate about the ultimate sacrifice, which sounds intriguing in theory, but it doesn't carry the same weight in practice because the movie lowered the stakes inside the cabin. It falters in the execution. Despite its flaws, I think there is enough in Knock at the Cabin to give it a watch, especially if you're a fan of Shyamalan, but as it's often the case with this director, it's not an easy sell.